Okay.
Great.
For those that are here, this afternoon I'm talking to Colleen Higgs. Now, Colleen really bravely, I think, started Modjaji 15 years ago and has run it incredibly successfully, publishing well over 100 books in the intervening years. Not only is she a publisher, an extraordinary publisher, but she's also a writer and has 2 collections of poetry, a collection of short stories, and most recently published a memoir called My Mother, My Madness, where she looked after her mother through final years with dementia. So an extraordinary thing to have done. Colleen, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us this afternoon. I do have some questions from some of the class, but I'm just going to kick off and we just talk.
Sure.
In general, it's just to get a feeling for Modjaji and to get a feeling for your idea about the publishing world at the moment.
Okay, sure.
All right, so let's get involved then. How many people get involved when you accept a manuscript? What is the process that then happens once you accept a manuscript?
Well, then there's a lot of waiting for the writer. Yeah, I mean, I'm not the most systematic, organized person, which, I mean, I think if I was, it would be better for everyone involved. But so after the waiting, I mean, obviously I say welcome and, you know, this is a story, but then it can take a while before we actually get down to working together. I've got a letter that I have developed over the years, which welcomes people to Modjaji and explains what we do and what we don't do, and what you'll get out of being published by us. And then, yeah, at a certain point, sort of after that, can be a few months, it can be longer. I appoint an editor, you know, mostly, yeah, I mean, pretty much always it's an external editor, freelance editor, someone that I've worked with and I'm happy with. Oh, we sign the contract. Sometimes we do sign it much later, but but yeah, we sign a contract at some point. And then the person works with the editor. And while they're doing that, we developing in the background, you know, an info sheet and the cover and the, you know, thinking about marketing the book. And then when the process of the editing is finished, it goes to a book designer who sort of finally, I mean, there'll be a cover, and I try to have that done as early as possible, because the earlier you can have that and the other information, the better. And I've got better over the years, but I'm still not as good as, was organized as, you know, bigger publishers.
You've put out lots of books, so you have to be organized.
Sorry?
You've put out lots of books, so I'm sure you're much more organized than you admit to.
Well, possibly. I don't feel very organized. I mean, I work, you know, I mean, I sort of keep going and just, and I find that books have their own momentum as well. So that's, yeah, let me just think. Book design, then it gets proofread. And I mean, it also gets proofread after the editing. And yeah, then when everyone's completely happy and all the things, ducks are in a row, it will be printed. And that's the first stage. And I mean, in a way, although that's quite labor intensive, it's also in some ways the easiest. I think the hard part is getting the book into the hands of readers, you know, getting people to pay money for a book. And as costs have risen, I think that becomes harder, especially in our economy that's, you know, full of load shedding and many other difficult things.
Is that marketing side up to you? Do you do that part of the marketing?
No, well, I mean, yes and no. So I work with Protea Boekehuis now as my distributor, but they also have a sales force. So as soon as that information sheet and the cover are ready, I send that to them, and their sales force goes around and speaks to bookshops about the book, with all the other books. So it's one of many that are coming out that month. And I mean, they do also do the same work for a number of smaller publishers, and including themselves. And I mean, I think they bring out quite a number of books every year. So, but it's probably not as hectic as being like a Jonathan Ball rep,
Sure.
Yeah, and so we get back orders. And so, I mean, I have, before I actually press print, I have a sense of what that initial number of books that we need. And I mean, because Modjaji uses digital printing, pretty much, it's the only way we print these days. I don't generally print a huge amount more than I'll need in that first 6 months to a year.
Could you just explain, when you use digital printing, what does that mean? That you only, as you've just said, you only print a specific number, and then you can go back and redo it if you need to. Is that it?
Yes. I mean, it's a different technology to litho printing, which was, the more traditional. And I mean, it's there are arguments and whatever about litho printing, and if you really want a book to be a certain way, or very beautiful, you want to go litho. So I mean, the last book that I printed with litho printing was The A to Z of Amazing South African Woman, which was a sort of a gift book in a way, full color. Yeah, I don't know if I've got a copy right at hand. Oh, I do. Yeah, so this book, can you see it?
Yep.
We printed it on litho, so the paper was quite thick, and it absorbs the ink, and it's got a very different look and feel to other kinds of books. But we had to then know how many we wanted to print, and it's more expensive, and then you also sit with stock, whereas digital printing is basically a very sophisticated version of a photocopying machine, that can print like that if you print off your
So you're not having to look at warehousing stocks of books.
No, that all gets warehoused by Protea. But as I think many other small publishers, I do have vast numbers of books in my house, not only books that I want to read, so to speak, but stock, because Modjaji has a website, and I mean, Protea also will deliver books, but it just has always proved to me to be useful to have books on hand. Sometimes people phone up and say they want to fetch a book, or the book lounge has run out of a book and there's been a run on it and they want 3 copies straight away. I mean, it's kind of, yeah.
But I mean, that must make life quite interesting, surely. It makes it very real. It's a business which is very hands-on.
Yes. It is. And I mean, I quite like it that there are these different, facets of the publishing. I mean, I've often found myself doing things, and I think, like, this is how glamorous publishing is, like carrying boxes of books from a car boot to somewhere, sort of staggering, because books are heavy.
But Modjaji must also have a fairly good market these days. I mean, you've been around a long time, so there must be a market that's anticipating your books.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, not everybody buys every book, obviously.
Sure.
But I think there is a certain, but I mean, it's still small, really, I mean, because most of the time I'm publishing debut authors. I mean, I have got a few people I've published more than one of their books, but very, very often when an author is really successful, then they go off and get published by someone else. They get an agent. And although in the last few years I've had that right of first refusal in the contract, I feel like if somebody doesn't really want to stay with you, you kind of don't want to just hold them in by legal means. Actually, it's better, I find, in terms of people management, as it were,
Yeah.
It's quite tricky dealing with authors as a publisher. It's like having a sort of stable full of highly strung racehorses. Yeah, so you have to learn how to manage.
Do you feel let down when they go off to a bigger publisher?
I won't say I feel let down, but it's one of the hard realities. I don't feel let down as such. I guess I feel sad, and I feel. It's complicated because I'm pleased for people that they can go off and be fabulous, and actually make some real money out of writing. Possibly, I don't know how that's worked out, but that's what I hope and imagine in some cases. Look, it hasn't been that many, but it's like Yewande Omatozo, Futhi and Shangila. Sorry, I'm feeling a bit blank. There are a couple of others. Jolyn Phillips.
But it's you've also supplied this incredibly important role in the whole publishing industry that many of these writers would not have got published in the first place had it not been for you and had it not been for the effort and enthusiasm you put into marketing their books.
Well, yes, but tell that to the big publishers and tell that to the writers. What I've also found with writers is that once their book has been through the process of being edited, and in some cases there's been quite in-depth manuscript development. It's not that the book comes and it's a sort of light copy edit, if that, and it's all like then we just edit, it just goes into the production thing. It's quite often, and sometimes, in the case of the award-winning writers, it has been quite a major manuscript development process. And what I have experienced with writers is that it's almost like when they win that prize, they sort of imagine that they were always going to win it, because there's a kind of, I think, writers sort of that racehorse aspect of them, they, in a way, I'm sorry, I'm mixing my metaphors, but they suffer from a lot of deflation at times and feeling terrible and like, oh my God, like what am I doing and whatever, but then also have these inflated ideas of they're going to be like J.K. Rowling or whatever, or win the Booker Prize or something, which does happen sometimes, Damon. But Damon probably wasn't necessarily somebody who actually had some of those inflated ideas, or maybe he has, but anyway, never mind about that. But so it's this complex thing that people sit with, and they don't actually, I don't think they realize how much work the publisher has put into them being as successful as they are. And they, I don't know, it's funny.
All right, it might be, but the point of the matter is that you've stuck it out. And you've launched a lot of careers, and for that there are many people who have to be thankful, and I'm sure in the coming years even more. The other thing, Colleen, it seems to me, is that there's money involved in this thing, and for you to produce a book is not a cheap venture at all.
No.
And you're forking up the bucks ahead of things. Do you manage to earn out as far as the publication is concerned?
I've called many times when I've been interviewed, in a sense, I've called it a subsistence publishing company. I would love it to be more than subsistence, but so I think that what Modjaji up to now has more or less been able to do is cover costs, including, a kind of living for myself. But during the last 2 years of the pandemic, I had to take on extra work to actually keep Modjaji going. I was like working to serve the work. It's not entirely sustainable. I know I've been doing it for 15 years, but the last 2 years were brutal. so, I mean, I'm rethinking things, and I'm thinking that, you know, in the future, I'm probably only going to publish like 4 books or so, and possibly publish more books under my hands-on imprint, where people pay for the publishing, and they pay me a project management fee. And then also I've started another new thing, which is bringing, you know, partnering with small independent publishers whose books I can get behind, and who I have a relationship with, to bring some of their books into South Africa, totally separately to Modjaji. And because there's a relationship and trust, instead of actually importing hard copies, they'll send the files and we'll print, you know, we'll do the same process, but then just print according to how many are ordered and maybe a few extra, and carry on like that. So I'm hoping that the distribution model might be more lucrative because, I mean, there's a lot less that goes into having that book that you can then get into the market. I mean, I think it'll be harder to sell numbers because you won't have the writers here. I think in South Africa, it's often very dependent on writers and their personalities as how many you sell, and, you know, how you can promote them, how sort of sexy they seem to the media.
And this was a point I wanted to get to as well. I mean, what does the writer do to help with sales of a book?
Well, I mean, let me answer it in the negative first. I mean, I've had a few writers who haven't wanted to do any public appearances or readings or whatever. I mean, that isn't what you want. You know, you don't want that. You want a writer who is willing to go to events and who has some kind of social media presence. And you know, I mean, I don't know how to measure these things exactly. I mean, I think it does make a difference. Like, for example, at the end of 2020, I published Lynn Joffe, The Gospel According to Wonder Be Lazarus. And I mean, her social media output has been, you know, incredible. I'm not sure how, and, you know, the amount of publicity and, you know, not just publicity, but I mean, sort of ways that she's come at it has been incredible. I mean, I don't look, her book for a debut novel, and I mean, it's quite a complicated, unusual novel, and it isn't at all set in South Africa. So, I mean, we've sold about, I don't know, about 1,200 copies so far. And yeah, that's not bad, you know, at all. It's pretty good, in fact, within our context. And also, we're now bringing out a second edition because we need more books, and Lynn had persuaded me to include a Yiddish glossary at the back because a number of people found it difficult without that glossary, although I felt like one could just say Google, you know, but anyway, maybe people don't want that interruption of Googling a word. And I mean, it's also very much to me, like, you read the book and you get this sense, even if you don't know the exact meaning, you know that this particular word is referring to some kind of drug or, you know, upper, and that word is referring to something to do with sex, you know. But I mean, people are different the way they read.
Now, do you think that her activity on social media helped push those numbers?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And she did do events as well, even though it was COVID. And I mean, she's got chutzpah, you know, like she...
Is that in the glossary?
Google. It might be, I can't remember. I mean, it probably should be if it isn't. Yeah, she's chutzpahdik. Yeah, so I think so. You know, I mean, the thing is, all of these things are not really, I mean, unless you've got, I suppose, some massive kind of statistical machinery behind you, quite difficult to measure. But I do think it has been, I mean, I think probably if it would have just had the normal kind of marketing, it probably would have sold about 600. So, I mean, it's double, so, you know.
It's a huge help, and writers should do that sort of thing. They should have Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and do something about it.
Yeah, but the thing is with Lynn, her whole social media input has been quite innovative. I mean, look, she works in advertising, you know, so she's been quite clever with the different ways that she's done things. I mean, she picked up on one of those memes, I think it was Bernie Sanders during the elections, the last elections. I can't remember what the thing was in the media, but he was carrying something, and so she took that image and made it into a copy of Wonder. It was like a file of something.
Right.
And then she's just had like Wonder with all these, you know, everywhere in history and artworks and whatever, you know, the Mona Lisa looking at Wonder and so on. And I mean, you know, I think that those ads are a bit like, or those memes or whatever, are a bit like Nando's, you know. I mean, I think in South Africa, we can never forget that Nando's exists and it makes us laugh. And, you know, I mean, we may not go out and buy Nando's chicken, but if anybody asks you, you'd know, or if you had to recommend, or I don't know, you know what I mean? It's like right there, everyone knows about us.
They need to be cheeky. I mean, that's what she's done, is being cheeky, and they're not all about I am.
No, they're not.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think that's important. Do you coach writers at all in what to say when they're on a panel discussion or they've been interviewed or something?
Not really, no. But I mean, that letter, which in a way, maybe I should divide it into two. I feel it's probably a good idea for a person to get it in the beginning, but there are things in there that people won't realize until they're more at that phase, which is you know, when the book comes out and how to do that. I mean, one of the things I would prefer writers not to do is to, you know, there's certain ways of being on social media that can be problematic. And I think people don't always realize that social media is public, you know, even if you've made it private, somebody could screenshot it or cut and paste it or whatever. And so, you know, I think people need to think twice before posting things.
Okay. Have you got an example there of what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes see writers, you know, bad-mouthing bookshops and, you know, even their publishers and, the book scene. You know, I don't know how, I mean, maybe it doesn't work against them, but I mean, I certainly feel like if I can pick up on somebody's sort of handfulness, as it were, like they're a handful and they're difficult beforehand, I might, you know, consider not publishing them. But I also don't think it really smooths the way in, it's, you know, it's difficult for everyone. And I mean, bookshops are also struggling. Look, I don't know if that affects the sales.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an important thing to know and to do. And now that we will be going back to festivals where writers are actually present rather than on a Zoom, that's what's going to happen. They're going to have to be up in front of audiences talking to people. And that can sometimes get a bit difficult. So,
I mean, look, I just don't have the wherewithal to, sorry, can you just hold on 1 second?
Sure. Please, if you've got any questions, just put them to Colleen, because I mean, I do think that this whole business about how we behave when we're up in front of people is actually quite important. Having behaved badly sometimes myself.
I mean, I suppose what I don't like as a publisher is if a writer in some public forum is identified as a Modjaji author and comes across in a way that feels counter, you know, that feels like it's, you know, I mean, obviously there are separate aspects, but it can sometimes, I mean, I think people often, you know, on Facebook and whatever, they post before they're thought. And I think some writers think that they're sort of like, you know, public intellectuals who can strike positions and whatever, and sometimes more contrary, but it's all fine. I'm not about censorship, but it's hard to, without specific examples, to explain exactly what I mean.
All right. So it's about a writer appreciating their position in society, that they're not necessarily the be all and end all.
Yes, but it's something a bit more subtle than that. Anyway, I can't.
No. Colleen, at the moment you're running one submission period in a year, and I think you've got a submission coming up this year, haven't you?
Well, actually, I'm not sure if I'm going to open for submissions because I want to, a couple of years ago I opened and I took on too many things. And I'm still working my way through that. So last year we weren't open. And I'm thinking of not opening again this year. Yeah. But what I have to say quietly to you and your masterclass is that, you don't necessarily have to consider a publisher not being open to them being closed. You can, if you write a very good pitch letter, and if your manuscript is fabulous, you might still get accepted. So, and also we do have, at least 2 agents that work within South Africa, certainly Aoife Lennon, and there's Beeka van Argelen, and Isabel, but I feel like that's probably not the right way to go as a debut writer. Isabel Dixon. So, you just have to somehow get your book to the attention of someone. And what Aoife said, because last year I ran a few seminars on Zoom, which people paid for. It was slightly a fundraising exercise. And one of the things she said is send your, I don't know if it's a whole manuscript or the first 3 chapters, but anyway, send it within the email, because often agents are sitting waiting or something, and that's an easy way to look at something. But not just, obviously you'd need to write something that would make them want to read further, like a. That's but anyway, nice. that talk is available. Perhaps you can invite Aoife to come and talk.
But she talked last year to the class, yes.
Okay.
But she did not make that point. I think that is an interesting one, because then there's no attachments, there's no having to open them.
Exactly.
And all the rest of it. It's just there, as you say, in the email. When you do open for submissions, on the occasions when you have in the past, how many manuscripts do you get? So
it's changed, because I didn't used to have a subscription, submission period. It was just, Okay. And that was one of the things that I didn't actually expect about opening up a tiny publishing company. Almost within a few months of existing, the floodgates opened, and it was like 400 or 500 manuscripts a year. So that was kind of impossible, and really very much just, I couldn't read everything and be, so something about that initial emails, whatever, just had to be, had to have some magic in it, So that was kind of unsustainable, because really it was just too much. It was impossible. I've always had interns pretty much since the beginning, and so they often do a lot of the initial weeding out, because there's a lot to weed out. Some people will send very half-baked things, and like with the poetry, which I'm also not going to be doing in quite the way that I have. Somebody will send their 300 of their best poems. No. You need to do some initial thinking about it and selection yourself. So, and the other terrible thing that happens is that I get WhatsApps on like, Saturday afternoon or Sunday evening or, 3 in the morning. I mean, fortunately, I pretty much keep my phone on silent all the time. I mean, fortunately for me. And if somebody WhatsApps me like that, I just ignore the WhatsApp and, sometimes I even block them. I just feel like if someone can't think that is impolite,
Yes.
And I mean, not just sort of in a stuck up way on my part. It's just like, think about the publisher as a person. I mean, don't want to hear from you at any hour of any day that suits you.
I think that's part of the problem of emails these days, is that we can send them out whenever, but what you're saying is that people need to adhere to business hours during the business week.
I mean, I think it's fine to send an email because that, in a sense, goes to a slightly separate space. But there's a way in which WhatsApps or text messages feel, and I mean, I get text messages as well, feel like they are
intrusive.
Yeah, and also that they are demanding immediate attention. I mean, I've also learned not to respond to things until I feel ready to, but it's like quite a hard learning from my side as well, to like realize, okay, I just ignore this until I want to pay attention to it. Sorry, but I was getting back to your other thing. So then at a certain point, I decided to have the submissions period, and I used Submittable, the software, application that you can get. And it's not a cheap thing to buy, and it's actually become unaffordable for me. I mean, it's a subscription you pay once a year. But if you want to have more than one person looking at those submissions, it's, the costs increase with every person you add to your team. And, I think it costs about 8,000 Rand now. Wow. But so because it was so expensive, I made a small fee in order to submit to Modjaji. It was like $10 or $15, maybe 1 year, So, I mean, I did that for a few years. And the numbers dramatically dropped, to like 120, 130. So I think that even just that small amount that people had to pay made them think twice about submitting, and I mean, the submissions were of a much higher standard. It's really hard, to to choose, because I mean, sometimes people have wonderful manuscripts, and you just can't publish everything. So
no, but I mean, that's part of the whole thing, and there are many publishers out there, so that's all part of it. Colleen, just moving on a bit away from Modjaji altogether, and just into the market in general. Ruth, one of the people on the masterclass, she asked me if I would ask you about trends in reading. Are people looking for more cheerful books these days? Is the crime and thriller genres, do they still attract the most readers? Has there been any movement in people's reading habits?
Look, I don't think I'm the right person to ask that, because, how do I know? Do you know what I mean? Like,
because you've got a feeling for these things. I know.
I mean, I have seen articles in like the Bookseller, or I'm not sure where else, about those kinds of trends that, people wanting happier books and cozy books or something. I mean, I still love, crime fiction, sort of brutal crime fiction. I'm not sure if it's a way of, I mean, I think I've puzzled about it, because I mean, I loved this genre for years. I mean, now I watch quite a lot, instead of reading, which maybe is what other people also are doing, watch series. I recently watched, they're not, I mean, I suppose most of these things, they at least have dead bodies, and sometimes they have, you sort of see how the bodies became dead. But I watched Morse and then Endeavour, well, maybe I watched Endeavour and then Morse, even though Endeavour came out. But, you know, it's Morse when he was younger. And there's something wonderful about sitting and watching the whole, you know, this endless, to me, I mean, maybe some people would get bored with it, but so I really don't know, you know, I mean, the way I've published, the way I've chosen things is they feel important to me in some way. The book feels like it's saying something important, and that there will be other people who need to, or who would, you know, want to read that it's adding to something. It's bringing a new voice, bringing a new dimension, a new perspective. Yeah, so. Which
is what Modjaji has become known for finding those voices.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not really, you know, stupidly thinking about, is this going to be a bestseller?
Okay.
You know.
You commit to a book because you like the book.
Yeah.
Is fiction better than nonfiction? I mean, you've done both. You've published both. So
what do you mean? Is it better?
I mean, in terms of sales. Sorry.
Oh.
I always think of money first.
Yes.
Which one worked?
The books that I've published that have sold the best have been a mixture. So you know, and I mean, maybe it's the person as well. Like, so Sindiwe Magorna's collection of poetry, you know, we sold. So for poetry, it was already a big seller, like, you know, well over 1,000 copies.
Sure.
Bomboy has been a bestseller, so to speak. I mean, it has been a bestseller in South African speak. And I mean, it was prescribed for 3 years to the University of Pretoria first years.
That's helpful.
It doesn't necessarily mean that each student bought a copy, not by any means. I don't know what they did, but it did increase the sales. You know, initially the first year it was like maybe 400 extra and so on. But so, you know, I've got no idea, maybe they
protested them.
Yeah, or sharing or stealing or not reading the book at all. Who knows? I mean, short stories, I've had a lot of success with short stories. I mean, like Ranelwe Malaki's Love Interrupted, you know, that has sold close to 3,000 copies. But now a lot of those stories, I mean, a lot of those copies were sold by her, you know, I'd say at least 1,000. And we sold rights as well. So, I mean, often the books that sell well here, we sell rights for, and often they're not, you know, those writers don't necessarily become so famous here. I mean, she's famous to me, but I don't know whether all of your students would have heard of her, for example, or especially not the ones who, you know, I mean, it'd be interesting to ask the ones who are doing fiction, have they heard of her? Yeah. And then, you know, Futhi Nchingila, also, I don't think she's super famous. As a South African writer. I mean, she also doesn't have that personality of being a sort of, I mean, she's quite a reserved person, let me put it like that. And I don't think she, I mean, she's not that very active on social media. I mean, you know, she has a whole thing, but so, and I mean, now Pan Macmillan have published her third novel. Her first one was published by UKZN Press. So sorry, I feel like I've slightly lost my train of thought. What was your question again? The money.
Yes, the money.
Okay, so there isn't an answer. I mean, I have my nonfiction hasn't done as well as you know, Jonathan Ball's nonfiction, but I think I published different nonfiction. It's mostly a kind of memoir, I guess, apart from the Jabulani means rejoice, the dictionary of South African names. And I suppose this A to Z of Amazing South African Woman is nonfiction. But most of the others are memoir of a kind.
Yeah. Is there a market for those memoirs in this country anyhow? I mean, are people buying that kind of memoir when it's published in the UK and reading it and then just ignoring the South Africans?
Are you asking if there's a market in the UK for our memoirs?
No. there are lots of memoirs get published in the UK. Those books come out here and get
Yes.
read in their ton.
Yes.
But a local memoir tends to get neglected, it seems to me.
Well, yes, but I mean, they still find their readers, you know, and they have a long tail, you know, that's, do you know what that is? Like the book, it's not just like a, you know, 6-month or 6-week wonder, and then it disappears. And I mean, I think that also has something to do with Modjaji and the way I work. I sort of keep plugging away at certain books, and when, you know, I mean, how can I say? I don't really forget about any of the backlist. I keep, you know, people will ask me about, they want to do something with some book, and then I'll think about it. And I don't necessarily suggest a frontlist title unless it's totally obvious that that is. And I mean, I'm thinking now, recently I was asked about nonfiction for a literary festival in France. So I suggested a couple of titles, and they chose Michelle Hutting's I'm the Girl Who Was, what's it? Yeah, I'm the Girl Who Was Raped. Is that right? Is that this? I suddenly feel like I've gone. Yeah, I'm the Girl Who Was Raped. I think that's what it's called. Sorry. Anyway, The Girl Who Was Raped is in the title. I've gone a bit blank on the rest of it. And, you know, she's just been at a literary festival in Nancy in France. So that was like 6 years after her book came out.
Wow, okay. So there is a long time. Gosh, now I forgot where I was going after the next one. Do you have any particular advice? No, before I go there. One of the writers wants to do a novella, which is about 30,000 words. So it falls, I suppose, within the category of short stories. Is there a market for that if there were, for argument's sake, 2 novellas to a book or 3? Would you consider that kind of thing?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've published things that are definitely not traditional lengths, you know, like Karen Lazar's memoir about having a stroke and recovering from it. I mean, she writes beautifully, and, you know, that was like 120 pages, I think, altogether. Wow. So it wasn't a novella, but, and yeah, I mean, I think we sold about 700 or something like that. But I mean, it's not, I don't feel like that book is over, you know, it's still, to me, it's a kind of classic of a certain kind, and it's so beautifully written. I definitely think one can publish anything. You just have to have a publisher who would be behind it, you know. I mean, I think I saw that Karina Brink recently published, I guess what it must have been, a novella of a writer who she published 2 novels of. I can't remember her name, the writer, but it was called The Pool Guy.
Oh yes, Melissa Falker.
Yeah. I don't know how long it is. I mean, I haven't actually, I've just sort of seen it in passing, but I haven't sort of picked the book up and looked at it and had an idea of how long it is. But I mean, that's almost like a short story published. I don't even know if it is as long as a novella. I'm not sure. I think, you know, you can publish anything. It's any length and any format. It just, but I mean, I'm not saying that bigger publishers see it like that. I think that's one of the for me, the beauties of independent and small publishing is we don't think, okay, it's got to be this many words, otherwise it's going to fail, you know, or whatever it is.
Okay. Colleen, to get through to you then, writers need to write a really sexy query letter to tell you what they're doing. Is that it? That's what's going to get you to look at the first 3 chapters?
Probably. But what I'm going to say, I feel like I want the person to be themselves. I don't want them to make shit up, as it were, about who they are and why they're interested in Modjaji, because, you know, I sometimes get these letters from people about why they want to be published from Modjaji, and I mean, to me, I don't believe them, you know. I feel like you're saying that because you figured it out. You figured out what we do, and but there's something kind of unbelievable in a sense if it's actually direct and honest and yourself. You put yourself on the line in writing the letter as to why you feel you want to be published by Modjaji and why your book would add to what we do, why it fits in. Then I probably would consider it. So in a sense, that initial letter is also quite important.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've published quite a few people who've been through your hands, Mike.
I know. I'm very grateful for that.
Who are they? It's so it's Michelle.
Michelle Edwards.
Go Away Birds.
Yes, and there was a non-fiction book before that.
A Person My Color.
That's him. And I think it's those two.
Is it only those two? I thought it was more than that.
Martina Damas.
Yeah, that's
the person of color. Yeah, but I think it's those two. But I mean, as far as the wind has got up here. It was just great that you took on those two books anyhow, and I hope.
So I mean, Michelle's book is. I think it's really wonderful. It's you know, I mean, I said to her recently that it reminds me of those American women writers like Ann Tyler and Jane somebody, but you know, they're kind of solid interest. Even not the person who wrote 1,000 Acres, although. No, I think that's more sort of heavy literary in a sense, Jane Smiley, although not all her books are like that, but you know, they kind of, you just get immersed in the story and the characters and the things they're going through. And, you know, I don't think I've come across, in terms of my reading, which I mean is limited in a sense, one of the things I've struggled with doing what I do is that I don't have much of a disposable income for
buying stuff,
you know, going out to buy books. I still use the public library. I do, you know, I do buy books, but just not in the same quantity that I did before I was a publisher. Oh dear.
Well, Michelle has another book, as you know, no doubt, which I gather is almost finished.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize it was almost finished. I thought she was.
Well,
I think she's diffident about her.
She is. Yeah.
Herself. Yeah.
Colleen, thank you. Are there any questions? Because I see time marches on, and the Lord of Load Shedding will soon make me go dark.
I just want to tell you something that happened to me this last weekend. Out of the blue, I was invited as a writer to take my book and to have a launch 2 years later at the State Theatre. And they actually paid for me to fly up to Joburg, and I had a driver fetch me from the airport, take me back. I mean, I felt like a celebrity in a way, not a celebrity, but you know what I mean? Like I was really taken care of. And they had this, I can see Helen's there. She was at the launch. I mean, it was quite bizarre. So I mean, I don't know. It's right in South Africa is a strange animal.
No, I think it's the way writers should be treated.
Yeah, but they so often aren't.
No, indeed. One has to learn to live with both sides of that thing.
Yeah.
And not
the
feel.
facilitator was slightly strange and sort of, you know, kept the discussion quite superficial, but still, you know, just kind of nice to be there. And I was able to wrest the topic away here and there to talk about things I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, good. Will you be seeing as Franschhoek Literary Festival is on this year? And for those in Cape Town, will you be there?
Well, I have also been invited to Franschhoek, and so has Sally Cranswick, Woman Out of Water, short stories. So those are, I mean, I was published by Deep South, but so only one Modjaji also has been invited. Yeah.
Okay, and you will be there as well?
Yeah. I mean, I usually am anyway, but I'll be there as a writer this year.
Well, that's nice. That's nice. That it? Any more questions? No questions? Colleen, thank you very much
Sure,
indeed.
pleasure. Thanks, Mike. Nice
Really
to
kind
chat.
of you for all of that. Tanya saying thank you. So there we go.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
And I'll see you
Good luck.
for the next one. Thanks, Colleen.
Okay.
Thanks,
Alright.
Colleen. Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Trying to see who all was there.